Hello, Webinar Wednesday fans. This is Greg reaching out to you from Cisco Winnipeg. We're just going to take about a minute, let people log in, and then we'll get started with our webinar. So please hang tight for about another 60 seconds. Okay, I think we'll get going. So for everyone that's just joined us recently, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Once again, my name is Greg Prokopowicz. I'm the Business Resource Director from Cisco Winnipeg, representing Cisco Prairies region. Got a very special guest with me today, Dwayne Ellard, Executive Director of Business and Marketing for Canada Beef. I've got a great webinar planned for you today, very timely topic. And actually, before I turn the slides over to Dwayne, I've got my own slide I want to share with everyone. And this really kind of ties into what drove this, the idea for this webinar for today. And if I can just get my slide, if I can get my slide to advance, I would be in great shape. So, very quickly, there's been a lot of discussion about beef on menus lately. I guess you don't have to look too far to hear the emerging words on menus, plant-based menus, emerging, you know, the word plant-based, and that whole movement of alternatives to meat on menus. There's advocates telling us to eat less meat to save the planet. It's better for you. But it is equally confusing times. And I thought this slide would be interesting to share with you. Here's a relatively recent National Post that went out. The end of meat, today's morality advocates, eating less animal protein and more sustainable weird stuff. So not very positive. And then, oh, wait a minute, beef's okay. Steak is back on the menu if a new review of risks of red meat is to be believed. Oh, nope, beef's no good anymore. Less beef, more beans. Expert says the world needs a new diet. No beef. No, beef isn't bad for you. Scientists totally disagree now. And then here's another recent one I found about plant-based burgers. So as you can see, it's very interesting times, and it's really confusing. If you're an operator, a restaurateur, you got to be very, I'm sure it must be confusing sometimes, wondering, what am I doing with my menu? Do I need to continue with beef dishes? Should I cut it back? What's happening? Before we move on to the slides, does anyone else have anything to add to this? And I should mention, if you'd like to add, do you have any other, what's the word? Some common misconceptions or statements out there? Are you hearing other things out in the news world? If you'd like to add some comments, please hit the chat option. And I see some people are using the chat box, which is great. I'd love to just hear if anyone else has any other perspectives about the recent challenge about having beef or consuming meat. See if anything comes up. Okay, nothing forward. So I'm going to ask one. What about CO2? Have you not seen some press and publicity saying animals and cattle are causing global warming? That's, we got to stop consuming meat to save the planet that way. That one, oh, carbon footprint. Here we go. Thank you. Carbon footprint of eating meat. Absolutely. That's another, whether it's a myth or reality. Our hope today is we're going to uncover some of this with Dwayne's help. I think one more that kind of sticks for me is, I'm not seeing it come up in the chat box, but what about this whole recent language around, oh, don't eat beef because it's got hormones and antibiotics and that's not good for you. You've got to consume other things out there. So these are all the things out there that right now giving some pushback on beef consumption. And as I said earlier, how does an operator respond to this? It must be, in some cases, kind of confusing. So that's why we're excited today to have Dwayne join us from Canada Beef. If you haven't figured it out already, we really want this to be an interactive session today. This is your opportunity to ask Dwayne questions as we go through his slides, an opportunity to dispel a lot of perceptions or myths or whatever we want to call them. We're here today to basically stop that. So Dwayne, I'm unshared. I'm going to ask you to share your slides. There we go. It's coming up. There we go. Presentation mode. We're in perfect shape. So Dwayne, welcome aboard. This is your first webinar Wednesday with us. You've got the keys to the slides. Once again, to remind our listeners, you have the chat option at any time. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. I'll be asking Dwayne to pause depending on the quality of the questions that are coming forward. There'll be lots of opportunities. So we really want to make this a two-way conversation today with our listeners. So thank you all for joining us. And Dwayne, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks everyone for joining us. Greg did a really nice job in speaking towards many of the subject matters. And the purpose of this conversation today and talk is really addressing myths and misconceptions. And so hopefully by the end of this, of the presentation, we'll have maybe a more clear understanding, and as well as those questions Greg had spoken about. Please, this is an opportunity for you to ask the questions that I may not have been able to have it clarified for you, or for you to consider the thoughts and ideas and information that's going to be shared. It really is an opportunity for all to become much more aware of beef and beef production in Canada. And so really quickly, our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about who Canada Beef is as an introduction. Greg spoke about, we spoke about earlier, grass-fed beef, grain-finished beef. What's the difference? What's the similarities? Social sustainability, environmental sustainability. We're going to take a little bit of time talking about sustainability. Hormones and other growth hormones. We certainly recognize the confusion from the beef industry of consumers and restaurateurs as it relates to sensitive subject matters, including antibiotics in beef cattle. And so today, we'll talk through the usages and whys and safety protocols of beef. Nutrition in beef as well. Greg did a really good job setting up. Yes, it's okay. No, you reduce your red meat. Yes, it's okay. And I think we've all experienced that with many different food groups over the course of time. You may have seen me enjoy a cup of coffee. I'll continue to enjoy that cup of coffee, regardless of claims. The value of Canadian beef.
Dwayne, sorry, Dwayne, it's Greg. Can I just pause you for a second? Since we originally started and tested the sound's actually gotten softer. Anything you can do to get closer to the mic would be helpful. I've asked our moderator to see if he can adjust the volumes at all in the background. So to our listeners, I'm sorry. We're just discovering now that the sound is not coming through very well. So Dwayne, let's continue on, and hopefully we get better sound.
Here, I'll come right into your room.
It's not making a difference.
If it makes a difference. And the value of Canadian beef as well. And Greg, if speaking louder helps, by all means, I have a little bit of experience with speaking louder also. And of course, questions. Greg spoke about questions earlier, or mentioned questions. This is an opportunity to just to ask those questions that you may or may not be sure of. So first of all, who or what is Canada Beef? Well, we are the global entity of the Canadian beef and veal industry. We basically are responsible for direct-to-consumer marketing, business development, trade, and end users, and that would include the Cisco's of the world, as well as you, the restaurateurs. Technical research and development. We spend a lot of time, as you can imagine, working with Canadian beef and finding those hidden gems and value added with trade partners. We are funded by the Canadian beef cattle farming family, by Canadian beef cattle farming families across Canada. Those are privately raised dollars, which Canada Beef has access to facilitate those three areas of focus. And we do represent all Canadian beef producers and those farming families, so regardless of region, regardless of type of program, a never program, a breed program, Canada Beef does represent all beef farming families. And to give you a bit of an idea, we are national in beef production from Vancouver Island right through to the Maritimes. And each of our provinces have an association. We work very closely with these associations as well to ensure that the research and the information is being shared with you, those interested restaurateurs across Canada and chefs. So let's start talking about grass-fed beef, grass-fed and grain-fed beef. And basically, what is the distinction or differences? Well, all beef raised in Canada is grass-fed beef. And what we mean by that is for the majority of the animals' time, they are out on pasture, especially during our spring, summer, and fall months. In the wintertime, depending on the region, the animal might be brought in a little closer to home to help with feed. So by essence, all cattle in Canada are grass-fed. However, and what they're grass-fed on is forage that can include alfalfa, legumes, clover, all sorts of very healthy and nutritious products. But then when an animal is designated to begin its market cycle, for about 3 to 4 months, maybe could be fed a higher degree of grain products. Those grains can include wheat, barley, and corn. And so for those last 3 or 4 months, the animal will consume a higher energy diet. And what that energy diet does produce is well-marbled products that you, restaurateurs, and your guests desire. Sometimes during the winter months, cold winter months here in Canada, -20, -30, all animals will increase a grain diet, and that can include some of our grass-fed programs as well. They just need the energy to keep warm. A little bit of a tidbit for you: when you're driving down the road at 30 below or 20 below the next time, and you see an animal with a beef animal with a little bit of snow on its back, that's a very positive. That tells you that that animal is warm and has been treated quite well. And so the insulation is doing its job, and that's that high energy feed diet. Thinking about sustainability. The term sustainability, beef farmers take a holistic approach when it comes to sustainability. Sustainability of the natural resources, the people and the community. It takes a community to support the agriculture industry across Canada, regardless of animal or plant proteins. We need those individuals who are working in the hardware stores and providing fuel and commerce. Animal welfare, animal health and welfare is extremely important in all forms of animal production. Healthy animals produce healthy food products. And efficiency and innovation. And this can be a sensitive subject. We're going to talk about efficiency and innovation here in the next slide or two. But when we think about efficiency and innovation, we are talking science-based. How are we using science to improve efficiencies and employing innovation? And we accept science. Science is a science-based approach to climate change. Well, one would imagine or could make an assumption that science-based is accepted as well for food production globally.
Dwayne, can I pause you for a second?
Yes.
Only because, once again, the sound has gotten better, so whatever has happened to improve that, that's great. You definitely are sounding clear. I do want to stop you because that last slide you had about the foraging and the feeding of the animals, this was a learning lesson for me when we first talked about this prior to the webinar, that these grasslands, there's an importance to have these grasslands around. Like, these animals are helping sustain our grasslands, correct? And
yeah.
You're saying that those lands aren't really ideal for crops. So this is actually a very good partnership, having cattle on these grasslands feeding and maintaining. Or sorry, further data on this coming up.
That's right, Greg. And we're going to talk about grasslands, and keep in mind, hopefully, you heard at the beginning Canadian environmental and sustainability. And we'll talk about further, Greg, but that's a good point.
Yeah, fair enough. You're right. I do see it's coming up in another slide. Off you go.
So thinking about sustainability in grasslands, the Canadian cattle industry relies on healthy, well cared for animals. And producers work very hard at raising those animals every day. It's a 52-week, 365-year commitment as an animal farmer, a beef farmer. And so that ensuring animals are cared for safely and healthy is of utmost importance to beef farmers across Canada. In 1991, the beef cattle industry took a leading role in development of the Code of Practice of Animal Care, Handling of Beef, and it's renewed in 2008 and 13. And you may or may not be aware, but under the Criminal Code of Canada, it is illegal to willfully neglect, maim, wound, or injure an animal. And I can tell you from the beef farmers' perspective, whether it's their own herd or a neighbor's herd, if they feel or see animals in distress, they will be proactive. And that includes helping out their neighbors as well, and finding out what may be causing this neglect. They're very socially conscious, as well as high priority on animal welfare. Additionally, provinces and territories also have laws regulating regarding the care and treatment of farm animals. It's of the highest priority. Canada's National Farm Animal Care Council is responsible for the Code of Practice. And if you appreciate multi-generational businesses, well, similarly with the agriculture industry, we have beef farmers 2 generations, 3 generations, 5 generations, and that can be attributed to the care not only in the animal but also of the land that these farming families have to continue to sustain, with an intent of the 6th generation, the 7th generation, and the 8th generation. What you see here is the Verified Beef Production Plus. It's one of the a voluntary auditing and certification program that's in place that does work with on-farm beef farmers in regards to animal care, biosecurity, environmental, and on-farm food safety. And this is a program that really helps farmers, ensuring that not only do they continue with these practices, but they are also updated regularly as technology and innovation becomes available. Wonderful program. Grasslands, to Greg's comment earlier. Cattle are miraculous, I have to say. They have this ability, and that ability is to convert grass that we as humans cannot digest into forms of energy and nutrition. And these are essential to our diet. So what you see in front of you is a grassland, and I might challenge many chefs to take that in and create an item that will serve consumers or your guests' needs, or utilize the animals that are able to convert that energy and nutrients. Beef production in Canada utilizes about 21 million hectares of ranches, hectares of land, of which about 93% of that is pasture land. Now, this is something that's very important, and Greg touched on this. Canadian grasslands, preserved through the efforts of ranching, can store up to 200 tons of carbon per hectare. Okay, so what does that mean, Dwayne? Well, as you can see with the image in front of you, these animals are natural harvesters of grass. And so if we think of grass left unkept, the grass will continue to grow, but it will only grow so high. And once that grass is growing so high, generally speaking, its capture of CO2 becomes less and less and less. By cutting the grass, or harvesting the grass down to a certain level, it regenerates itself. And so in Canada, from an environmental impact, management of grasslands is a positive contributor to capturing carbon for Canada. Hopefully that makes sense to all. If you have a question, please ask Greg and we can address that. Only 9%.
Sorry, Dwayne, I was just going to say that is such a critical point because, as you know, as I started off the slides today, there is a lot of this misconception or myth out there that these animals are contributing to CO2. You know, all these things about save the planet, we need less animals walking around on grasslands. And here you are totally, you know, having a very strong counter argument that this is very important to our environment. So thank you for really hitting in that note for us. That's a great talking point. And to Dwayne's question, if anyone has any further questions around this before we move on, maybe I just want to pause for any opportunity for chat. Anyone have a further question or further explanation from Dwayne before we move on? Let's just give it a second, Dwayne, see if somebody wants to type something. Randy wrote, aren't the cattle replacements to the bison in days past? That's
a very good point, Randy. For those of you across Canada who may not be familiar with the prairie lands of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, 300 years ago back, estimates have been as high as 60 million bison roaming the prairies of our three provinces and into the Montanas and the southern United States. 60 million. And so fundamentally, being a bovine, their digestive system is similar to cattle. In Canada, our entire herd is approximately 13 million. And so from a CO2 emissions, we're far less today than we were 200 years back. Very good point, Randy.
Okay. One other, just not really a question for you, Dwayne, just a comment from Jason. On a different note, as much care that is taken with the raising of the animals, recalls and beef products, such as the one on October 11th, it was an E. coli recall, distributed and being recalled from shelves. This step is where the public loses some confidence in the processing and sale of these products. So not really a question, just more of a general statement. But it's also, my only counter to that would be it's not the only thing that can have recalls.
No, and that's right. And I'm gonna, it's a warranted question though. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about the Canadian beef industry post-harvesting, not too much, but post-harvesting in our ability to not only mitigate, but also trace back when we do have an instance of a food recall of some sort. So it's a warranted question.
Lastly, Dwayne, before we move on, did you mention, I remember you sharing with me also a story around methane or CO2 from animals, or is that coming up later on?
Yeah, no, I can finish off on this part here with that, Greg, thanks. Canadian beef, now again, Canadian beef production, Canadian beef has one of the lowest greenhouse gas footprints per unit of production in the world at about 11.4 kilograms of CO2 per kilogram weight, per kilogram of live weight. All right, so what does that mean? I'm not a scientist, but however, compared to the global average, we are less than half. And that is attributed to our beef farmers who make the investment in technology and innovation to ensure we are meeting the climate needs of not only Canada, but of the world. So just to sort of sum up a little bit about with regards to environmental sustainability, cattle producers, as mentioned, are have to be long-time partners with the environment and manage their land to ensure sustainable and viable operations for the long term. As mentioned, not only the last 3 generations or 2 generations, but they're looking at the next 3 or 4. Producers use management practices that protect the health and welfare, the health of animals, and environmental, by protecting water sources. There are some concerns as well, have been concerns around water sources and working towards the maintenance of sustainable agro ecosystems. We could speak for an hour just on water management processes and protocols. Beef cattle are often raised on land that is unsuitable for producing grain or vegetable crops, and eat grasses that people can digest. I spoke a little bit towards that already. Land that could be cultivated to try and grow food crops would destroy the natural habitat of wildlife. I've read somewhere, and I think I have another slide down, but that there are approximately 60 species of grassland habitat at risk through the cultivation of traditional grasslands. Also, something to really to think about, or somewhere to go, is you may not have heard of Guardians of the Grasslands. This is a new initiative to speak towards the Guardians of Grasslands, or you can search it or go directly to Guardians of Grasslands of the Grasslands.ca. And here you will see videos and testimonials and individuals talking about the grasslands. Interesting, the video starts with a panoramic view flying through through more of a jungle, sort of a canopy landscape, and then transitions into the grasslands of Canada. Really start to talk about sustainability as it relates to where you are and the production of beef in the world. And we're talking about here in Canada. A wonderful website and a wonderful source of information if that's something that you're interested in. In 2012, the benefits of well-managed grazing were acknowledged in the State of Canada Birds Report. And that report recognized that cattle grazing is a positive practice that can help preserve habitats for birds and other traditional animals that utilize these types of grasslands. Moving into hormones and other growth promotants, as well as we're going to talk a bit about antibiotics. But I'll just set this up to start. This is a very sensitive matter, speaking points, and generally I sort of equate it to the values of the heart, what I believe and feel is important or not important, versus the head or science. And often those two emotions can be, or those two thought processes can conflict with one another. And so the purpose of these next two slides, these 2 pages of slides, there's a lot of words here, but it really is not to convince one or the other. In Canada, we do want to ensure that for those individuals who want a hormone or a free-from program, that there is a Canadian beef option. Very important. As mentioned, we represent these types of beef farmers as well. The purpose of these next 2 slides and 4 slides with the antibiotics is really just to try to help clarify hormone use and antibiotic use. So we'll start with hormone use. The use of hormones and other growth promotants for raising beef cattle has been the subject of public debate, confusion for many. I kind of went through that. Interestingly, and I think we do appreciate that hormones naturally occur in varying degree in animals, people, and plants. Canadian beef farmers and ranchers may opt to use approved hormonal or other type of growth promoters as it relates to practice in raising cattle more sustainability. We talked a little bit about sustainability and utilizing science to help battle climate change and less usage. One hopefully would appreciate the use then in our food productions. The use of growth promotants help cattle convert the feed they eat into lean muscle more efficiently, reducing the amount of land, water, and feed required with less overall environmental impacts. And so this is where that heart versus the head. You have to have, you can have that conversation internally, but appreciating the facts, appreciating the science, I think is important when you're making those determinations. And there isn't a wrong determination. If you choose a hormone free program, that is your choice. It's not necessarily saying that a choice that of consuming products that have been utilized science to help in environmental impacts is wrong. It's a choice.
Dwayne, can I pause you for a second? I've got some questions here, or at least one question came forward from Randy. Can you give some examples of naturally occurring hormone levels in other foods?
I can't. I don't have that here at my fingertips, and I'm not a scientist. However, Randy, if that is something or folks are interested in, I would be more than happy to work with our colleagues internally and supply and provide that product to Cisco. And then asking a Cisco representative down the road in the next couple of weeks or so if that information is available.
Well, I think just not that I'm a scientist either, but I think it's with common sense to think that any animal has natural occurring hormones of varying degrees. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dwayne, is the myth around hormones is that farmers are injecting animals with hormones because they want to grow these animals large and fast to the detriment of the animal and to my health when I consume it.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, as well as when you hear the term hormone, I think one may envision a bodybuilder, a massive bodybuilder back in the 80s and early 90s, where they would inject directly into their muscle to achieve that growth. It couldn't be further from the truth. Generally speaking, the hormones or growth hormones, what they're actually designed to do is not go into the muscle like a human. It actually works in the gut. And what it does is it helps the gut convert water, food, energy into muscle more effectively. And to be quite blunt with you, what that does is rather than eating food and it not being digested as efficiently and going out the other end, it's actually being converted into muscle mass more efficiently, and that's where you get the growth.
Great. More questions, Dwayne. This actually seems to be a good slide to get some engagement here. Thank you from Aaron. Naturally occurring estrogen occurs in tofu, for example. Thank you for that. I agree with you. Take that plant-based. What else we got here? There's one more question I thought we had. Oh yeah, sorry. This is we're kind of going around a little bit of circles here, but another question that came forward was, is corn-fed better? Is corn-fed beef fatter than grass-fed beef? Fatter is the word they want to understand.
Yeah, I think I understand. Is a fat content, is it healthier or less healthy? From what I've read and from what I understand, there are differences in corn-fed, but also in corn-fed protocols as well. Down in the United States, they primarily feed their animals a high ration of corn-fed diet. The protocols are similar. You just don't, when an animal enters into a feeding protocol, you just don't give them corn like a baby eating human food. They build their tolerance up, and the corn becomes, or in Canada, grain feds will become increased more and more. And so there has been some research, and I don't have it on with me right now, but the differences from what I've read are minor. I don't know if I'd use the word minute, but they are minor. And if I recall, a nutritionist used the term something to the effect, not of a significant nutritional difference of some sort.
Okay. Dwayne, I got another hot question here for you. This one, even though it's a Cisco question, I want to make this more of a general question. As Marilyn wrote, many customers ask for 100% Canadian beef and 100% natural. Can we say we're getting that from our Canadian beef that we purchase, whether it's from Cisco, from the grocery stores, or other vendors?
Well, the term natural is not a defined term by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency to start off with. So I may caution a restaurateur using the term natural as it relates to Canada. We will see natural claims here in the United States quite frequently. However, their regulations of the term natural are nowhere near the Canadian. I don't even think there's a defined term for what can be called considered natural here in Canada. And natural in Canada is far-reaching. It's beyond beef. But the Canadian CFI, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, their natural is literally natural, like running around in a natural setting, feeding on items, food products that they would naturally source in the wild. So that's the first thing I might comment on the term natural as it relates to beef.
Okay. Thank you. That is a loaded question. I know. I had a funny feeling you're going to go there. It's no different than the word organic. I understand organic in the U.S. has a totally different definition than Ag Canada's definition for organic. So yeah, there's a lot of, once again, there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of misperceptions of the word. A question from Brian. What is the state of the beef industry in Canada in regards to capacity for production, domestic draw of production, and export marketability? In other words, is there excess capacity? Is beef a Canadian natural resource?
I certainly appreciate the term Canadian natural resource, and I would say yes to that, or I'd agree with that comment. Production. The Canadian, if you ask an average Canadian, in Canada, is the Canadian beef industry a large industry? And I think most people on the street who may not be tied to that or associated with the beef industry would say yes, it's a large industry. Well, the reality is we're about 11th, 10th or so in world production. Number one, I believe, is the United States, and then a South American country, and believe it or not, India as well is not like number 2 or 3, depending on the year. And so we're about 1/10 of the U.S. production. That's the closest production system to the Canadian beef industry as well. We mirror each other in many different ways. And so from a global perspective, we're actually quite small, but we've never professed to feed the world beef. What we profess is to feed the world high quality grain-fed beef. And we're known for that globally. And so when we work in different marketplaces, we generally don't work with the largest of grocery chains. If you think of China, over 1 billion people, and Japan, up 900 million or whatever the number is, we'd never be able to supply them beef. So what we do is we take a targeted approach, and we work with retailers and food service operations who see the value in a high quality grain-fed beef. Now, that being said, approximately 60% of our production is utilized domestically. We are our best customer for Canadian beef, and about 40% of our product is shipped to markets who see value. But I also say that with a caveat, and that caveat is that our beef carcass is a large animal, and it has lots of little pieces that here in Canada we see very little value for, but in many markets, high value. Thinking of an operator and operations, tell me the last time you utilized, beef steak, outside skirt meat, terrace major muscles. The list goes on and on. Plates, beef bellies, similar as pork bacon. Well, somewhere in the world, there is a market for Canadian beef. So not only our middle meats, traditional parts, and the grinds, but also we have to consider those products that we just haven't been able to build a market here in Canada. So it's important to ensure that our product's affordable to utilize the carcass in those markets that see value.
So Dwayne, one more question, and then I do want to give you a bit of a heads up. We're running a little long. Yeah. So maybe another 10 or 15 minutes. I want to allow some time for questions. But a good question came up here from Eric. And Eric wrote, please clarify on this point. I understood years back that cattle are fed and finished the major crop in the area which they are raised. For example, Western provinces feed a lot of grain and grass. Central Canada, including Ontario and Quebec, grain and mostly corn. Eastern provinces are grass and potatoes. Is this the case, or is the feed balanced as a regulated? Is the feed balanced and regulated like our food?
Very good question, Eric. And yes, overarching, for the most part here in Western Canada, it'll be barley and grain fed. Sometimes a little bit of corn too, depends on the pricing and all sorts of different things. In Ontario, it's a balance between corn and grains as well. There are programs in Ontario that cater to a corn finished program. And then moving off into the Atlantic provinces, yeah, the potatoes is a really good good question. And at one time, potato, if I recall speaking to producers in the Maritimes, the big potato growers and manufacturers had no value, or considered no value to the skins, to the off of the primary use of a potato. And so animal beef farmers had a steady source of feed, that being potato trimmings, and also French fries were off spec. There's all sorts of different reasons that they would have access to these relatively cheap, if not free at some point, at times, product. Over the course of time, though, like most industries, the potato industry has been able to find value in those products, skins and offcuts and whatnot. And so we see less and less potatoes being utilized as end finishing feeds. However, still incorporated into feed as well. And I'm not familiar with, but I would imagine that there will be some producers that have a program that do have a potato fed aspect.
Right on. So there could be some boutique farming. I've actually had potato fed cattle from PEI. It was delicious, I got to say. Really enjoyed it. But in general, it sounds like there's a bit of regionalization in terms of what people are feeding based on crop availability and the value of the crops. But fundamentally, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Dwayne, cattle generally are grazing on grasslands, and then we make our choice what we want to feed them closer to finishing time, correct?
That is correct. All beef animals in Canada are grass fed for the majority of their life.
Thank you. That's another good thing to remind our listeners that our cattle are grass fed cattle. It's just what we do near the end in terms of finishing. So anyways, just a heads up again, time wise, maybe another 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'll go through this next slide a little bit quick because I want to get the antibiotics as well. It's the next couple slides. It kind of feels that these are some questions that individuals would like some clarification or discussion around. Studies have demonstrated these products are safe, proper use and management, not pose a threat to humans. Health Canada requires that animals given growth hormones follow strict protocols in terms of withdrawal. And the Canadian Food Inspection Agency monitors and tests for residue levels, and there is no such thing as hormone-free beef. Hormone-free beef is not an appropriate claim. And so what I kind of went through here, if we have time, I'll talk a little bit more in depth about the monitoring because it does relate to the next subject matter, and that being antibiotics in beef cattle. Antibiotics are used for three major reasons: treatment of sickness caused by bacteria, prevention of disease, and efficiency and enhanced feed efficiency. What that really means is that healthy cattle will consume and convert much more efficiently. If cattle become sick or at a high risk of becoming sick, antibiotics approved by Government of Canada are used to help control, prevent, and treat the disease. And that's similar with our friends who have never type of programs. I'll talk about that in a second right now. In order to display the label raised without use of antibiotics, the cattle used for producing this type of beef must not have received any antibiotics at any time. In addition, no antibiotics can be administered by the mother of the animal in question as well. So it's The prodigy is once removed, in other words, the mother, from antibiotic usage. Now that being said, I don't know of any never never program here in Canada that if an animal does become sick, that it will be treated accordingly, whether that's the administration of antibiotics. That animal will be segregated and will be sold or placed into the inventory of going into to the regular feeding protocols of Canada. That's very important because, as you can imagine, the animals do get sick. And I don't know of a beef farmer of a Never Never program who has animals that were sick that now live the rest of their lives on the prairies. They will go into the programs of being treated. It is important to note that all cattle sold in Canada that have been treated with antibiotics must go withdrawal period, which has specific periods of times. And we have time. I'll talk to you about the regulations and surveillance of these results to date. Surveillance of these results to date, that antibiotic resistance is low and not increasing bacteria found in cattle for the meat from cattle as it relates to the antibiotics of greatest importance to human medicine. As I sort of mumbled through that, basically what's being said there is no correlation to antibiotic use in animals as it relates to resistance in humans. Two different types of products, programs.
Thank you for that, Dwayne. Great points. Any questions? I know, as you said earlier, this can be a hot topic. So anyone have any burning further questions, or we'll move on? Actually, let's just keep moving on. I'll stop you, Dwayne, if a question comes forward.
So leading into so how's this all monitored away? Well, it's monitored through the Canadian Cattle Identification Agency, and this is a non-for-profit organization, industry-led, that was established many years ago to provide support for efficient traceback and containment of serious animal health food. We talked a little, there was a comment earlier about E. coli. This is one of another foodborne or potential foodborne illnesses. This is the protocol to be able to efficiently monitor livestock as it relates to where they go. So how is that done? For those of you who may or may not be aware, there's what's called a radio frequency identification tag, or an RFID tag, that's placed in the ear of an animal. And that RFID tag needs to be attached to that animal prior to it leaving its farm of origin. So if that animal then is moved to another farm or moved outside of the boundaries of the farm, it will not move until this has been attached. And from that, the livestock operators are able to record and report livestock traceability related data through the Canadian Livestock Tracking System. And so those numbers that you see on the little yellow tag button, that is attached to that animal and only that animal for life. So when that animal is treated, when that animal is moved, that animal, whatever the lifespan and significant events have happened is recorded through the monitoring system. And that number then is retired post-harvesting and kept on file in case of a reason to recall the animal or the where it has been, and it's audited and enforced by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And to give you an idea, this is highly touted globally from a traceability perspective. And we're in North America, we are by far and away the leader in traceability program of our Canadian cattle herd. And so when indeed a number of years ago, 10, 15 years ago, when an animal, when we needed to find an animal and where it had been and who it had been in contact with, it could take a week or two. Today, well, probably within 48 hours, and that's going a little bit long. Whomever needs to understand the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, where that animal has been, it is now traceable within an extremely short period of time. If there are any other questions with regards to the system, it's very robust. We can move real quickly to nutrition in beef. I'm kind of excited to talk to you a little bit about this because as you were familiar, the Canadian Food Guide has come out. Now, there's been a lot of debate with regards to the Canadian Food Guide, so I wanted to have this conversation with you. Taking the plate as the example, we can see on the right side about half of it's fruits and vegetables. Fair enough. The bottom quarter is choose whole grain foods. But this protein area now has become a hot subject matter and topic. What this image is to depict is the portion of protein. What the image depicts, is where you can get your protein from. And so they're not suggesting that your protein is a quarter of an egg, of a hard-boiled egg, and I counted these out, or 8 red beans, or 4 almonds, or those 3 pieces of beef you see up at around 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. No, it's the portion size. And so from Canada Beef's perspective, thinking of a single source protein like Canadian beef incorporated into a balanced diet is extremely important. And the Health Food Guide, Canadian Food Guide, recommends eating a variety of proteins that include lean meat. What they're suggesting and what we're suggesting is that what comes off the plate? Well, with about 50% of our calories and a high percentage of sodium coming from ultra-processed foods like pop, plant-based meat products, chips, baked good, and other meat protein substitutes, perhaps reducing these foods would be best way to improve eating patterns. I would highly recommend going to www.thinkbeef.ca. You can find the nutrition, /nutrition, really clarifies and walks you through the nutritional value of Canadian beef. And so, were there any questions with regards to that, Greg? Because I know that has been a point of confusion to me.
Dwayne, no questions came up, but I put a smile on my face because I noticed you slipped in the plant-based meat protein as an ultra-processed food. So boom, there, take that, plant-based. Very well said. Can you just define, when you use the word single source, what does that mean when you use that expression?
Yes. The requirements of protein in your diet, we believe that Canadian beef, and science has shown, packs a very, very concise punch for those types of nutrients. In other words, at 2.5 ounces the previous Canada Food Guide for your per meal, 2.5 ounces of beef offer you a fairly concise protein requirement, as well as single source. There's no salt and pepper unless you choose to add it. It hasn't been tumbled. It hasn't been baked, theoretically, unless you choose to, in butter. It is a single source ingredient. And today, consumers, guests, are more and more aware of ultra-processed foods and salt and other ingredients that they may or may not be familiar with, included in their diet or not included in their diet. And beef is very simple. Beef.
Thanks, Dwayne. Dwayne, can I suggest we jump ahead a couple slides and get into the role of beef on the menu just to save us some time?
Yeah, basically what this sort of sets up the role of beef is it says these next 2 slides, just basically that people are consuming beef and actively include or don't think about in a positive way. Don't think about whether to choose beef or not. They just choose it. The other was actively avoid, and it was a very small percentage, and that stayed true to men, women, and you can see geographically, Quebec, I'll just quickly say 63%. Quebec traditionally one of the highest consumption rates, if not the second highest, of North America, and that includes Latin America as well as beef consumption. So it does make a little bit of sense that their consumption levels, we're considering moving down, but their overall consumption of beef is very high. So thinking about beef on the menu, a lot of this I think we know. Menus, prime real estate for of food service operations is generally the beef. Outside of those entities that have chosen to remove or are not include beef. Quality beef dishes have proven themselves as profit generators and profit builders. I often say to operators, when you're thinking yourself personally of going out for dinner tonight, think of this. Think about going out to dinner tonight. Did anyone say green beans? Where's the best green beans? I'll even say mashed potatoes. Where are the best mashed potatoes? No, you may think of the center of the plate, and generally that center of the plate is a beef product. Planning, analyzing, designing, and merchandising your menu can make the difference of thousands of dollars in profits. And thinking about our service staff, by simply increasing 4 dinner steaks versus, let's just say, a pasta dinner. And I'm not opposed to pasta dinner. I enjoy pastas as much as the next person, maybe a little bit too much. But let's review the math. Regardless of the 20% tip or not, about an $18 pasta 4 times is about $14.40. If you're able to upsell to a steak program product of some sort, $36 or $28.80. That could put in your staff and shared amongst your staff of an extra $3,600. And with the pressures on operations with staff and minimum wage, ensuring that our staff, our front and back end staff and everyone in between has the ability to make as much money as possible is extremely important to operations today. And beef can deliver. And ordering a steak is always an opportunity to upsell. And upsell is so important because once I've made the resolve to upsell or up my menu choice, I'm going to be open to appetizers, maybe seafood, sides of some sort, the special sauce, wine, and aperitifs. Once that resolve has been made, and I'm in for a steak dinner or a fine beef dinner of some sort, chances are I might have that cup of coffee afterwards and enjoy. I'm in. Higher check always produces higher tips. We talked about that, as well as hopefully higher for your restaurant as well, produces higher profits. Sort of to wrap things up here, Greg, build your differentiation on experience and authenticity. Reimagine culinary excellence and craftsmanship, continuously experimenting with the products you have and the products you have the access to. Balanced meal options. It's important to ensure for those guests that we have balanced meal options. And we say avoid misleading marketing, and that is resist the incorporation of fear. We're hearing fear from some of our competing proteins, not our meat proteins, but other proteins, of fear and anxiety as it relates to animal products, whether it be health, nutrition, sustainability. We talked about that today. If you feel the need to fear something, we could all fear the Walking Dead. We do not need to fear Canadian beef or beef in general. And just quickly wrapping up, basically what we spoke about, Canadian beef is sustainable, safe, nutritious. It is local. For the most part, within 100 kilometers of operators within Canada, there is a local beef farming family, and your Canadian beef program can be advertised as such. And it is recognized globally for all the above. This is a photo in South Korea, in Seoul, of Canadian beef enjoyed across the world. And when we come to these types of marketplaces, where the majority of the products, food products, are coming from somewhere else, the investments of the Canadian beef industry and the government of Canada in food safety is paramount. And finally, sell the sizzle. You can speak to maybe your Cisco representative with regards to some of these tools to help ensure that your communication from the guest to the server to the back end is consistent. And that's what we, as restaurateurs, operators, only desire. Consistency, consistency, consistency. And Canadian beef and veal can offer you that consistency you desire.
Dwayne, thank you very much. You covered a lot of talking points, and you actually had a nice recap at the end. So I had some notes. I kind of had the same points. You covered some great conversation around the importance of our grasslands and how cattle fit into that that whole circle of life and maintaining our planet. We had great conversation around hormones, antibiotics. When you did the menu contribution dollars or profit dollars per dish, that's a very relevant point that beef is a very strong contributor to menus. So let's not forget that as restaurateurs. This is one of the ways you can make good profit dollars. The single source, the whole definition of single source is very important to understand. So when you look at an ingredient label, it just says beef. That's very simple. And then you covered some great sustainability points. This is a chance for any of our listeners for final questions. I do know I have one question I wrote down earlier in the presentation, Dwayne, was there's some people out there that it could be even Cisco people who are protein specialists. They were asking, how can I be a better ambassador with this information? Can I get this information in some shape or form?
The website on the screen, canadabeef.ca, is a good starting point.
Okay.
I do appreciate over the last number of years the relationship Canada Beef has had with food service distributors, particularly with Cisco Canada. I can say that Cisco Canada does invest in education regarding not only their employees, but as a result of this website, the operators, and setting all of us up for success and making an informed decision. As interested in resources, working together with Cisco, we continue to evolve and add resources and training. And similarly, for those operators who may choose to come to Canada Beef, our website, we have resources as well, and we're always open to questions and comments. We have a vibrant, for more information, click here, that we'll do our best to have those conversations with you and provide clarification.
Dwayne, I got a free plug for you. Jason brought up a good comment. Can you mention you have an app called the Roundup?
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us about that, please? Sounds like, according to Jason, this is a great resource for restaurant staff. What is it all about?
Yeah, the Roundup app, Google, Apple Store, is actually designed for consumers standing at the meat counter and you have a decision for dinner tonight or later on in the week. Where we found that the extension of the Roundup app is into the food service, and that is because of our food service. Many of our employees are average consumers first as well, and so their level of knowledge is at a certain point. It's easy to take a look around. It talks about the carcass. It talks about the different cuts of beef, suggests cooking recommendations for different cuts. Those of you who are familiar with beef certainly appreciate there's 3 or 2 roasting techniques. We do not roast a chuck similar to a prime rib or a middle cut, similarly to a hip. And it talks through. So thanks for that, Jay and Greg. Is that Roundup app has really crossed into our food service and has been embraced.
Very cool. I didn't know that myself. Thank you, Jason, for the tip. We're out of time. I want to thank you, Dwayne, for your time and for preparing the slides. I just want to let our listeners know that after today's recording, we'll send you a copy of the recording after the fact, if you'd like to have that. And I also want to mention to any listeners on right now, today we talked about beef. We have another webinar coming up on October 30th with a different approach. We're going to be moving into the ocean. So we're going to have a special guest speaker from Highliner Seafood. And the title of this webinar is going to be called How Frozen Seafood Will Save the Planet. So once again, a very compelling, exploration of how seafood is changing and the importance of frozen seafood. So we're going to learn a lot from Highliner in a couple of weeks. Hope you can join us. Thank you again, everyone.
Great, surf and turf.
You bet. And for all our listeners, thank you for your engagement and your questions and your patience for the sound issues at the beginning. The sound definitely did get better early into the presentation. So I think our listeners was able to hear everything well enough. So thanks again. Take care, everyone.